So welcome everyone to the EMPA Picker Center's Food for Thoughts speaker series. Today we're honored to have one of our esteemed EMPA colleagues and professor in our program, Kweli Washington, who will be discussing business, culture, diplomacy, managing change at home and abroad. As always, please keep yourself on mute and keep questions either to the chat or to the end of the session. We'll have a Q&A part to our session. And thank you all for joining us. You can find our past recordings on the Food for Thought Speaker Series website, which we put in the chat. And you could register for future sessions using the links on that website. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I'll hand over to Bill for the intro.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you as always to you and to Valerie for keeping this stream alive for now into our third year. We began this during the depth of the COVID lockdown and depression to keep us together and keep us focused on the future and keep us focused on hope and how together we can solve almost any crisis. And I think all things considered, we're making progress. And we've been very fortunate. Let me reinforce what Jeremy said. Please go to the website, as thousands and thousands and thousands of others have done, to see some of the really great discussions we've had over the past 2+ years. We're very fortunate to have Kweli Washington with us today. He is a professor in our program. He is a serial entrepreneur who has been successful for 2 decades in creating new businesses with a focus on the globe, with the focus on helping people and making the world a better place, and also being successful as businesses. He is a very impressive person, a former Rhodes Scholar, studied at Harvard. I forgive him for that. Phi Beta Kappa at Harvard, so that's pretty impressive, and his master's degree from the University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. He is currently the Chief Operating Officer at Piano, which he will, I'm sure, tell you more about. It's a digital software company that really enables people to learn more about their digital customers and better direct their programming and businesses toward those customers. And I guess in many respects, we are part of that digital world in Food for Thought. So, Professor, I'll turn it over to you. I know you have a presentation. People will, and Jeremy, if he sees an important question that you don't see, he'll raise his hand. But otherwise, it's your show. As in the past, we will end promptly at 1 p.m. regardless. And again, Professor, thank you so much for joining us. And the show is yours.
I really appreciate it. Thank you, Professor Emeke, and thank you to Valerie and to Jeremy, as well as you, Bill, for inviting me to be a part of this. I have done some review of the previous speakers, and suffice to say, it's nice to be in such august company. And Rosa and others who have joined, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to listen to me. I hope not drone on too long, or at least drone on long with some relevance to your life and work. But my association with the Picker Center and with SIPA is truly one of my really important affiliations, and the experience each year of working with students. Mostly it's been through the portfolio workshop. Has really been a highlight and a great kind of space to both to engage with really bright and and exciting people to engage with, and of course, colleagues in the faculty and staff, but also to, on good days, be able to have a little space to kind of distill some of the information that is coming at me fast and furiously in the other part of my life, in my day job, in my work at Piano, and to try to have some synthesis around what is still to me one of the most important ways to engage the world, which is via an academic lens, or at least a lens of the life of the mind, and to do so in combination with the practical experience that comes at us in other channels too. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity here. I hope that what I will share is interesting, and very much eager to hear questions, now or later, as these are mostly emerging thoughts rather than conclusions, and will benefit greatly from the input of people who are part of this session or see this session down the road. So again, thank you for the very kind introduction. The success that you cite, as well as the entrepreneurship, is certainly all relative. But I do feel that I'm speaking to you at a moment where I'm really enjoying the work that I'm doing and finding that I am able to bring together or bring forward, past experiences, whether they be in the academy or just, kind of personal experiences around travel, and certainly, kind of previous work experiences, to bear in the kind of current manifestation of my job. And so I'm happy to have a few moments to talk to you all a bit about that. I think that where I'll start here is this. Despite the fairly together presentation slide or kind of cover slide here, I'm going to veer more towards talking from my notes, in part because I want to kind of signal that this is fairly open-ended stuff and new stuff, and invite the inputs of the folks around the table, as it were, whether now or into the future. I think that the kind of basic premise that I start from, there are three premises that I start from. One is just that the chief operating officer role is sort of an interesting one, and that it probably differs by each person who occupies that role at each organization that they might occupy it. And so, whether it's called the chief of staff in some more political circles, whether there is a sort of, kind of quality of a provost or a dean, maybe in the academic world, a chief operating officer in a business or a nonprofit organization, can have any number of things that sort of fit within scope of that person's responsibilities. And so on the one hand, it can be a little bit vexing and maddening and kind of a source of let's say, obscuration rather than elucidation. It kind of sounds fancy, although I tend to joke that, partially joke that my job basically involves kind of wiping up the coffee stains of our millennial colleagues when they're too busy to do so. But there is a quality of mostly of sort of people and culture and process, and to some extent strategy and diplomacy, that ends up being the way that I approach the job that I'm in. And so that's both a reflection of past experience, kind of job descriptions or resume elements that have, that I have accumulated over time, but it's also, I think, a function of personality profile, kind of my inclinations. And so, I come to you to talk less about the, kind of esoterica of the technology that we operate, less of the kind of tactics and strategies that are most effective in our, evolving go-to-market strategy. And, not even to talk to you a whole lot about the kind of evolution and growth of the business, but rather to kind of speak to something that gets a lot of, I think, copy or ink spilt especially in recent times, culture, but oftentimes means, like a chief operating officer title, different things to different people, and oftentimes is kind of conceived, I think, and kind of used very deliberately metaphorically. And I would like to make a case for using culture quite literally, quite kind of specifically in the way that it is used in social anthropology, which is, I think, the sort of discipline, the academic discipline from which I come. And so I would start with a basic premise that one of the keys to success in any kind of organization that involves people is an approach that has traditionally been the domain of the social and cultural anthropologist, which is participant observation, kind of ethnographic encounter, right? Where there has historically been a field in which a person, had some distant community that might somehow shed light on humanity, that they would go and visit, and they would figure out tactics for joining that community, and they would think a whole lot about ways in which their presence would be disruptive and try to kind of control for those disruptions, but that ultimately there'd be a quality of being there that would be part and parcel of coming to understand not just the specifics of a community, but also some of the more universal qualities of humanity. And that kind of orientation, I think, can be important in a business context, even if the business is operating with more or less a kind of closed community in one location where there isn't a lot of need to kind of navigate with variables that are outside the business, or at least outside of the realm of what we tend to think about as business, but especially if that business is operating with lots of people in many different geographic areas, crossing, national boundary and language, and dare I say it, culture, not just the culture of another business or another group of people who are operating as part of an organization, but the culture of particular regions within the world, countries, and et cetera. And so my basic view here is that the tools of cultural analysis that have been popularized within social anthropology or cultural anthropology, and I could spend a whole lot of time talking about all the problems there, but let's presume that there are lots of people who are problematizing the cool tools of social anthropology, and I can appreciate that there are limits, but that having more of a participant observation orientation to how we operate with one another, especially in the business context, especially in the international business context, and at times like the times that we live in that feel extreme, is good. That's sort of where I think we all could be and see some benefit from it. And so, right, the topic of my talk today is essentially business culture and diplomacy, right? International affairs in a time of geopolitical turmoil. I will spend most of my time talking about my work at Piano and try to abstract it as much as possible, because I do believe and have long believed that there is more in the way of synergy or analogy between sectors, private, not-for-profit, public, than any one in those, then we tend to give enough belief and attention to. And so my hope is that there is implications that can be drawn for those who are operating in other spheres as well, if we strip away the kind of profit motive. And therefore, if I can get my technology to work, my sort of opening salvo here is, that it's a sort of simple truth, but an important truth that, merely thinking about profit and loss, or merely thinking about efficiency, or merely thinking about, kind of metrics-driven rigor, or whatever the sort of pieces are and the tropes are that necessarily are part of the operating of an organization, public, private, not-for-profit. We need to be much more aware of the variables, social, political, cultural, and other, that we operate within than we ever have had to be in the past. And that, on the one hand, people within the public sector and the nonprofit sector often, I think, have a better grasp on that than people in the private sector. I think it's true regardless of where one sits. And so, some of the things that I want to highlight and will highlight are just that, there is a return to be had for being multidisciplinary, for sort of coming with a view of adaptive behavior, of sort of seeking to understand as a basis for working together. And that, if we don't do that, we end up in difficult straits, especially under the kind of current climate that we operate in, right? Which certainly feels unique in my lifetime. And so that's kind of where we will operate here. One of the books, ethnographic books that has always been held close to my heart, that I've always held close to my heart, is Benedict Anderson's Imagine Communities. And as I am pretty far on a day-to-day basis from the Academy, I'm not exactly sure whether Benedict Anderson's stock is up or down since he published his book in the late 80s, early 90s. But it's one that I've always held close. And I have to confess, I haven't gone through the deepest, darkest chapters of ethnography in the middle of the book. But the notion that there are features of a community that are produced and reproduced and kind of provide the artifacts of that shared experience, whether it be language, or it be, again, culture, or it be national boundary, or other forms of identification, that those are pieces of a puzzle that coheres a group. That's always made a lot of sense to me, but also specifically this concept that these things are produced, or they are imagined, right? That they are not necessarily, they don't necessarily exist in a kind of immutable, categorical way, that there is work that is done, whether it's conscious or unconscious, to produce culture, produce that conception of community. And that, Imagine Community, to me, is not in any ways a disparaging idea. It's not a pejorative, this notion of imagine, but there is a kind of, this concept reflects a sort of a creative process and an ongoing process, and recognition that this is happening at all different levels around the world, and that certainly when you enter into a purpose-driven initiative, and I don't mean sort of grand purpose, but literally where there's a set of objectives, including management of profit and loss, it's at one's peril not to be conscious of the qualities of culture that pervade any grouping of people. And so I will, kind of not go a little lot further on Benedict Anderson or Imagine Communities than that, except to say that really is the kind of, filter, the lens that I have tried to approach work at Piano, especially in the last few years, where so much has been going on in the world. And so, just a real brief on Piano. We have, in the spirit of how we communicate to markets and investors, we have grown really rapidly in the last several years, right? And you can see a increase in the slope in the last few years, really since 2018. And one of the things that has driven that increase in the slope of our growth is that we have been very active in the acquisition market. We have found companies that we believed were compatible with ours, whether it be around people or it be around customers or it be around technology, and or ideally all three, and figured out ways to acquire those companies. And so there's a certain amount of organic growth that we have experienced, and there's a certain amount of inorganic growth that we have experienced. But in any case, we have been very active in the acquisition market, and much of that has come to me in the need to figure out how to galvanize organizations that have, beforehand been separate, and in many cases, been competitors. And so what I want to talk to you a little bit about in terms of the specifics of Piano is the kind of post-merger integration work that we have done, particularly against the backdrop of COVID, of racial justice protests, of January 6th, of inflation, of a war, in a horrific war in Ukraine. And so that's kind of how I will tackle this here. We are a company of kind of 600 plus named employees, 600 plus named customers, over 700, I think, employees at this point, and offices around the world, some of which are engineering offices, and most of which are commercial offices, right? We kind of have a market-driven approach to where those many offices are. But a company of 700 people with 18 offices, I can attest to this because offices are part of my scope of responsibility. That's kind of a lot of offices for a company of our size. But the reality is we have been very focused always on trying to play to a strength that we think we have. And we want to be humble here, which is the ability to operate in different communities around the world. And that really has been one of my primary areas of focus and responsibility. And so when people have asked me, and I joined here, it'll be 8 years in September, I started off focused on strategy work for clients when the software that we intended to sell wasn't quite ready for market. And so we started off with a real emphasis around digital subscription. And so if you've ever bumped into a paywall, the likelihood is that somewhere in the inner piping is Piano software. That won't win me many friends at a cocktail party, but it does mean that there is a certain North Star that has historically guided us, which is we think we are helping media outlets and journalists be able to do the work that they do, despite the tumultuous time that they have been in the midst of for years now, where their lunch has been gobbled up by a variety of forces on the internet, prime amongst them Google and Facebook, which drive lots of traffic and in exchange take lots of the percentage of ad dollars that those media companies would make otherwise. And so our initial focus was around digital subscription. And before we had the tools to be able to properly support that, I joined the company with an eye towards working with our clients or prospective clients to help them understand how they could run successful user revenue generated businesses, subscription businesses, with the content that they were producing, with the newsroom that they had, with the reality that they faced in terms of the changing landscape and the changing economics, right? And so if media companies have historically always made money in two ways, one was advertising, right? You could go to a movie and expect to see a trailer for another movie. And the other was user revenue, right? I'm going to pay for a ticket. I don't feel like, because I'm watching a trailer of a film, I don't have to pay for this current film. Those were the two ways in which most media companies made money. And on the internet, where everything is topsy-turvy and information wants to be free, or whatever the kind of bromides are, it becomes a whole lot tougher to run an advertising business, right? And 95% of the revenue historically that media companies have made has come through advertising. And obviously that really varies on the type of media, but the lion's share of revenue has come traditionally through advertising, and a much smaller share, although a reliable share, a predictable share, a share that has really kind of governed the editorial orientation, the design orientation, the kind of vision of what the company that produces the media is really been that sense of loyal users who are willing to pay money on a subscription basis to get access to that media. And so that kind of model has been forgotten on the internet. Therefore, media companies have really struggled. And the impact has largely been that it's harder to maintain quality journalism, especially at the local level, which is where it's probably most needed. And so my job when I first joined Piano was to help our clients, our prospective clients, understand that no, it wasn't just the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times that could arguably charge for content, although to some large extent, both of those organizations have really flourished. And it is true that they have done amazingly well, and that there is sort of reasons why, most notably quality journalism, but scale as well. And a willingness to innovate and the ability to innovate, but also these folks who we would talk to who are not the Journal and not the Times would say, sure, those guys can do it, but we can't. And my job was to kind of work with them, frankly, to look at the traffic data on their websites and say, what content is really performing, right? Who's reading what? What are your loyal users, people who come multiple times a week, multiple times a day? What are they consuming on your website? Are they sports enthusiasts? Are they there for the crime blotter? What are those dynamics? Let's try to understand those. Those will help us to better understand what is premium content for you. And that was my job when I first joined. And as we began a kind of acquisition strategy of mergers and acquisitions, in addition to just shoe leather in the markets, I shifted my orientation, or our CEO asked me to shift my orientation more towards talent and culture and towards the organizational development that was going to be necessary, both to support a growing organization and to facilitate integration once new companies are acquired and brought online. And so that's what has been a big part of my job in the last several years, and it's been a great part of our story. And when I talk to prospective candidates to work at Piano, and they say, "Well, why do you work at Piano?" And I am heartened to be able to say that the reason that I work here is the same as it was when I first joined, which is one, I'm a sort of person who likes a slightly wider swim lane. And in a growing company, there's always more work to do than there are people. And so you can kind of engage in a little bit more of a, kind of improvisational mode than you might if you were occupying, one square of 50,000 in a large organization. And of course that changes over time, but it's true. That's one of the things that attracted me. Another thing that really attracted me is the cosmopolitanism of the company, right? When I joined, we were 6 people in New York who were involved in sort of commercial activities, and then 10 people in Eastern Europe who were involved in engineering, and that was kind of the nexus. We have really kept true to that, right? Now we have 18 offices scattered around the globe. We've got concentrations of people in Asia, in Latin America, in Europe, and in the US. And if you think about our ratio of people in the US to people overseas, we are 100 people in the US and 600 people outside of the US. And so we are a decidedly international company, and that presents a set of opportunities and challenges, but it's not a place to come work if that's not part of why you want to come to work, right? That's what I will say to people. It does mean some early mornings or some late nights. It does mean language challenges. It does mean, a need to kind of figure out how to get on the phone when the inclination is to get onto a Slack or to an email or to other chat, right? Or to put a note in a ticket. There's a kind of, quality of working remotely that we have always had as part of our experience that we have tried to provide some counterbalance to, with a greater emphasis on beautiful offices, with a kind of culture of picking up the phone rather than just relying on asynchronous text messages, and with a kind of recognition that we will only be successful in the long run as a company, given how we've set out, if we can attract more people who see a kind of virtue in a cosmopolitan global experience rather than see the necessary challenges associated with it. So wide swim lanes, cosmopolitanism, and then lastly, a kind of sense that, right, we are doing something that even if we need to squint, we can say is good for the world, right? And so our technology is awesome. We spend a lot of energy trying to come up with good features and functionality, and we have historically done that. And so that's kind of the last bit, right? That we are engaged in work that is interesting, that is not bad, and that even if I weren't at a company focused historically, at least, on providing monetization tools, analytics tools to companies, media companies prime amongst them, I would still be at many of these websites checking on sports scores or reading, Jonah Goldberg's recent thoughts on X or Y. And so there is a way in which we remain engaged in kind of a world of ideas. We are doing, I think, good enough work, right? We've got some sense of mission around it, and there is a quality of innovation and change necessary in any software firm that permeates the experience for all of us. And so those are really the 3 things, these sort of wide swim lanes, the cosmopolitanism, and the kind of sense of content that's interesting, whether it be content of our clients or the software that we're producing, that have always been, for me, big parts of why I'm here and big parts of what the company culture ends up being about. And so I kind of mention all that, so you got a little bit of background in the work that we do. One of the real kind of areas of focus for us is growing outside of media, having kind of hit what you might call in the parlance, some ceilings around total addressable market, right? We are sort of well known in media around the world. The Journal is a client, but so is the South China Morning Post. NBC is a client, but so is Clarín in Argentina. We have clients like the BBC in media. We also have clients like Total Energy, right, the petroleum company or the energy company. And so our ambition at this stage is really to serve not just media companies, but brands that have websites where they are producing content and bringing users to those websites and seeking to facilitate a relationship with those those users that is not creepy, which there's a lot of creepiness on the internet these days, but does have a sense of similarity more to the subscriber. I read The Atlantic, therefore I have some identification with the editorial voice or the design or what The Atlantic is all about. We want to kind of facilitate that metaphorically with users on a website, right? There is so much anonymous traffic that is kind of garbagey traffic as well. That's kind of the ecosystem in which we live these days. People will follow a link, but won't even know where the link is and move forward, right? And kind of access it via a social network or some other platform or search result. And so losing track then of like, where am I? Who are the people behind the website that I'm sitting on? Where is the stuff that I'm interested in? Am I looking for new insurance policies? Okay, cool. There's some set of content that they produce here on this website that will help me to direct to them, including content that is informative, right? Kind of branded content that's relevant, not just to the sale, but also to an informed consumer. And so more and more of our orientation as a business is growing what is now a quarter of our business, which is with websites that do other things beyond producing journalism, and rather have ultimately a desire to do more or sell more of whatever it is that they're selling, but to do so in a way that is presenting relevant information to users at a website, right? And so that's essentially how our business has evolved product-wise and in terms of market strategy as well. And so that, I think, is, I hope, a helpful nutshell for what Piano does and kind of, where we are going. I think that with that, let me turn to a few notes about the kind of cultural, kind of being a participant observer, being a sort of reader of culture in an effort to navigate the times in which we live. I think I'm going to talk about three things, right? One is the sort of political climate and ways that we have navigated that. Two is sort of economic climate and ways that we have navigated that. And three is a kind of social climate and ways that we have navigated that, all with an eye towards a kind of sensitivity to culture, a kind of recognition that we hail from a variety of communities, imagined communities, and that ultimately the kind of opportunity here in the long run is for us to be able to generate and continue to generate. And I mean us, I mean the entire kind of staff of Piano, but I hope this has application more broadly to kind of be thinking about producing culture that is cohesive, that is inspiring, that serves as a kind of source of roadmap to people in a way that enables us as a company, as we get larger and as our swim lanes, frankly, get narrower, to all be rowing in the same direction. And that's really what my basic thesis here is at the end of the day regarding culture. So a few things then on politics. And one is this. We have 700 staff members. 400 of those people are software engineers or people who work directly with software engineers, quality assurance people, technical project managers. And so I mentioned at the start that we, when I joined Piano in September of 2014, we were 16 people or so, and we had a cadre of software engineers in Eastern Europe. Those software engineers were in Russia, where one of our co-founders was originally from. And so that was a source of great competitive advantage to us in 2014, that we had a leader with a kind of corporate point of view, a small corporate point of view, since we were a small corporation, who could leverage his cultural understanding in an area of the country, not Moscow, but a 3-hour flight east of Moscow, and his networks and his knowledge of people and his personal reputation to build a dedicated team of software engineers who were not a body shop, which is oftentimes what ends up being the case when Western companies have teams kind of scattered around the world, but rather were part and parcel of a mission that is piano, or part and parcel of what the HMS piano, right? The kind of boat with souls on it. And so, we went through great lengths, and I mentioned this remote work being part and parcel of what we do, embedded in our culture. We went through great lengths to figure out how to bring together people, whether it be through travel from time to time, or it be through, cadences of meetings or communications that happen, or fun stuff that can be done remotely to facilitate a shared experience between people in the US at that time and people in Russia. And as we grew, that tight link and that kind of overemphasis, frankly, on creating those ties that bind became a real source of success for us, right? And were important features of our ability to produce far more software than a company of our size from a revenue perspective would be able to produce, because we had this really organic and intentionally built conception of shared culture and perspective. Over time, we grew that team to several hundred people. We also expanded through acquisition into Ukraine, and so found ourselves in February of this year with a dilemma on our hands, which was a kind of realization that we were in a place that probably not a ton of people were, which is very, long-standing, positive working relationships with individuals who we relied upon and who relied upon us in both Russia and Ukraine, and being able to see the horror that was the Russian government's rolling into Ukraine and killing people and destroying the place, but also trying to figure out how to navigate our business, both vis-a-vis our staff, staff in Russia, staff in Ukraine, staff throughout the rest of the world, right? And vis-a-vis customers and investors. And so, one of the things that really became clear to us is that we needed to be super supportive to our Ukrainian colleagues who, unfortunately, for the most part, were unable to leave the country, and therefore there was sort of limited work that we could do on their behalf other than continuing to engage with them, pay them, and where they requested it, asked for more work and we gave it to them, right? That kind of thing, but hard to sort of do too much in that context. But with Russia, we had some folks who expressed an interest in leaving. And so one of my jobs, and again, back to the many hats and the kind of diverse array of activities of a chief operating officer, one of my jobs ended up being to relocate 40 staff and their families to Istanbul, Turkey. And both from a perspective of wanting to be positive and supportive colleagues to those who were feeling, at risk or unhappy with the kind of circumstance they found themselves, but also in an effort to build a level of continuity and emergency response for our 600 clients who relied heavily on software that was produced, at least in the original going, in that part of the world. And so I found myself needing to be adaptive, not just to the cultural inclinations of a group from Russia who wanted to leave, but to figure out quickly that I couldn't do this without going to Turkey, since I didn't know what the heck was going on in Turkey myself. But B, once I figured that out, to kind of go there and work locally with immigration lawyers, with businesses in sector and outside of sector, with potential sponsors and employers of record, with relocation services, and really had to kind of get in there and embody, right? And this is back to the kind of participant observation idea that I started with, kind of embody what it meant to be a Russian, not from Moscow, but from 3 hours east of Moscow, right? What my development economics professor in my master's program would have described as a day's walk to the nearest road. What it meant to relocate them to Istanbul, a city of 17 million people, where there is some historical linkage between the country of Turkey and the country of Russia, but not a lot. What it meant to actually be those individuals coming to an entirely different place where these folks, that our team didn't speak much English, much less Turkish, and think about kind of refactoring their lives there under a great degree of uncertainty, and under a degree of concern about life and their futures. And so that was ultimately what I did. I went there, but B, I did my best through conversations and gesticulations and navigating to try to figure out how and what we could do to make their relocation most effective for them, and by extension, most effective for the business. The other thing that we have spent a lot of time and energy on is making sure that that we are sensitive to the features of being a Ukrainian working at a company that also has Russians, and being a Russian at a company that also has Ukrainians, and that we are balancing our ability to be supportive to our staff and kind of show a commitment to our staff while maintaining a sense of clarity around the horrors of the Russian government's actions, and also ensuring that we are not ending up being a battlefront, right? And so it's been a delicate balance, one that has required a lot of effective, I think, emotional intelligence from all parties involved. And I'm optimistic that in the long run, we will all, as a world, get rid of the, move beyond the moment that we are in. But two, that we will be able to, as a company, continue to be effective despite the sort of delicate nature of our situation. I had intended to talk a little bit more, but I spent too much time in my initial remarks, which is probably just fine. I hope that, as I bring this to a close, I hope that I have, whether through report or through behavior, kind of demonstrated what I think to be true, which is the way that we have successfully navigated many changes in the last few years and continue to grow at the pace that we have as a company, and grow with acquisitions outside of the United States, is a real sense of, one, an ambition for the culture of piano to be cosmopolitan, to be innovative, to be dynamic, and to be a force for good in the world. And two, a real interest in understanding the contexts in which our colleagues around the world operate as a first step, not as an afterthought. And with that, it's not that things have always worked out without incident, but I think that it has enabled us to be more effective at responding when the inevitable, vicissitudes of real life bear in. One prime example being the Russian war in Ukraine. And so, if I could close, and hopefully I'm still on time. If I could close, I would say just that there is an importance, whether you are in the business world or you are in a government position or you are in a not-for-profit world, to start with what I think social anthropology figured out on its best day, which is a certain level of humility when engaging with communities that one doesn't know, and a real demonstrated commitment to doing one's level best to understanding that community, and not just understanding, but to becoming a part of it, again, with humility, with an eye towards how do we better understand humanity, and therefore, and here's where I do think there's an application here, better coordinate our action for purposes not just of advancing our business interests or our diplomatic or political goals or the mission of an organization, but rather for advancing humanity in some broader, some grander sense. And so I really appreciate you, Professor Emeke, and you, Valerie, and you, Jeremy, for inviting me here. I appreciate those of you who've been able to join. And what I would invite, since we are at time, what I would invite is for any questions that folks have, that they communicate them to me, kweli.washington@gmail.com, and I would be really happy to hear your perspective, share some further feedback, and furthermore, incorporate what I learned from you in the next inevitable interesting development in Piano's journey, but also in our kind of collective human journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. That was fabulous. I have 4 questions, which I'll be sending to you in the next day or so, and I'm sure many of our other audience participants have some things to say too. It was really marvelous. I learned a lot. I have some ideas for you, maybe, that you might consider for your company.
I need them. We need them.
Well, hopefully they won't be too crazy. But thank you again for just a wonderful presentation. Thank you all for attending. And we're going to take a short summer break for food for thought, but we'll see you right after Labor Day. So I'll kick it back to Jeremy to conclude our discussion, and thank you all.
Thank you, Kweli, and thank you all of you for joining us. As Bill said, he took my my words. We will be returning after Labor Day, so thank you everyone for joining, and hope to see you soon.